Hello, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. Once upon a not so long time ago, my friend Becca met a boy. He's a man, and a good one, a sweet one. Gathered at the backyard banquet set out by a mutual friend, they caught each other's eyes when they both reached for the spring roll platter. Idle chatter about veganism and celiac disease quickly turned flirtatious, and just before Becca went to sleep that night, she sent him a message and followed him on Instagram. The next morning, she woke to an enthusiastic and playful response from the vegan. 2 days later, they made plans to rendezvous at an outdoor music festival. By the time the band were unplugging their speakers, he was holding her hand. "I'm not sure how I feel about him," she confessed to me at first. But when he took her back to his place a couple nights later, she surrendered her doubts and indulged herself in the ecstasy of a romantic touch. She had concerns, obviously, but she'd also been single and passing through a bit of a dry spell in the last few months. What was wrong with giving herself a little pleasure? She deserved it, didn't she? And if the universe had brought her the vegan, well, she was going to give thanks and enjoy the buffet. A perspective that I will celebrate in perpetuity. For so long, women have been shunned at the buffet table. People of all genders and races and sexual orientations have. But for clarity's sake, I'm going to stick to the heteronormative version of women here. Centuries ago, when women ruled kingdoms and/or were considered goddesses, we were welcomed at the buffet. In many circumstances, the buffet was delivered to us. Beautiful men literally carried trays of decadent fruits and sweets and all manner of other delicious things to our thrones, or to our beds. Powerful women took lovers for many of the same reasons as men did or do, to extend their power or indulge themselves sexually, or both. But somewhere along the line, as the influence of patriarchal rule killed the reverence of women, we were forced under the banquet table. If women wanted sexual pleasure, they'd better find a way to get it from their husbands. Anything outside that context was slapped with a disparaging label and banished from polite society. Untrue, of course, in the realities of men with similar social status, but I don't need to get into all of that here. I am quite certain we collectively know the wild hypocrisies that existed as accepted truths about the difference in socially accepted sexuality between women and men. The point is, for far too long, sexually empowered women have had to hide under the tablecloth, sneaking whatever little morsels we could blindly reach when no one was looking. We may have been hoping for a slice of cheesecake and ended up with 4 olives and a slice of cheese, which perhaps may help to explain why for so many women we think we've got a crab puff when in reality it's just day-old bread. Or we pretend that we're super excited about the celery stick when we actually wanted lobster tail. I was in my late 30s when I first felt brave enough to approach the buffet. For the first time in my life, I was both single and confident enough to acknowledge that I deserved to feel loved. Even if I was sure I didn't believe in forever, I knew that I was a human that needed to be touched, and that I was a woman who could get it if she really wanted to. Shy and a little nervous, I put on a dress that made me feel beautiful and tiptoed toward the table. At first, all I could find was dried fish. By that, I mean old men. No, not like that. I didn't actually date or go home with any old guys. What I mean is that for a while there, months, the only men that ever seemed to show interest in me were old. And I don't mean in their late 40s. These gentlemen could have been someone's grandfather. Lamenting this to my best friend on her porch one night, I determined that I had been attracting wildly inappropriate for a relationship with me men because I was afraid of meeting someone I might actually fall in love with. I didn't want to risk it again. I also realized, however, that I did want a stable something. More than one-night stands, less than full-fledged boyfriends. I wanted to find someone that I could have great sex with on a regular basis, someone that wanted to sleep with his arms around me. For a while. After about 20 minutes, it's just too hot and uncomfortable for that shit. But I realized I would like to enjoy the company of the kind of guy that I also wouldn't mind waking up next to. I wanted someone that I could have deep, meaningful conversations with, someone that was like-minded enough to share some of my crazier ideas and that could hold space for their viability, their truth. I wanted someone that would grab for my hand walking down the street or put his arm around my waist while we lost ourselves in an intense piece of art. I know, at first glance that sounds a lot like a relationship. I can see why you'd think that, except that it isn't. In my version with this theoretic dream guy, I wouldn't have to worry about whether or not he's a dedicated worker and willing to share financial responsibilities. I wouldn't have to make time to visit his aging mother, or concern myself with whether or not he's doing a good job as a single dad. There would be no need to concern myself with whether he's likely to move to Europe with me in 10 years when I'm ready to retire, nor consider his plans if I were invited on a last-minute road trip. I didn't want a boyfriend, I wanted a chemistry friend. which admittedly is an especially niche version of a man and relationship. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was looking for pleasure with a man. Several months of introspection later, I came to the awareness that perhaps I'd only been finding dried fish because some part of me hadn't believed that I deserved cheese-stuffed ravioli. And when I finally started to get my head around that idea, really draw it down into my reality and feel worthy of attention and affection, the table turned and I stumbled across the cheese dip, otherwise known as the young guys. These gents were crowd pleasers, the kind of guys with whom any woman that isn't in it for the long haul would love to share a weekend or a bed. Single, attractive, attentive, experienced enough to know how to share pleasure with a woman, but not long-term relationship material. Exactly what I was looking for. I met the artist after I very literally nearly bumped into him in an art gallery. He found me on Facebook and messaged me for months before we actually met up at a bar on the edge of town. I knew he was nervous when I sat down at the table across from him, but hell, so was I. We chatted for a little while, and when he finally asked me to dance, I word vomited all over him. Look, I'd love to dance, but I'm a terrible dancer, and I have to warn you that if you touch me, I'm not going to want you to stop touching me. It's been a really long time since anyone touched me, and I'm also in no way interested in being in any kind of relationship, at all, with anyone. So I just want you to know that before, anything happens. He knit his eyebrows together in confusion. I took a deep breath and another stab at clarifying my message. Honestly, I thought he looked a little hurt. But then he invited me to follow him back to his house, where I met his roommate and two very drunk female friends. Red flares were shooting off like it was the finale of the 4th of July. I'd known he was young, but I found out we were both crossing decade thresholds, and certainly not the same one. I'd known he was a single father, but I did not know that he still didn't really know how to do laundry. There was a pile of musty-smelling clean clothes on his unmade bed. I'd guessed he was highly desired because of his beautiful body and face, but I had not expected his drunk girlfriends questioning my intentions with him. Instead of getting in my car and running, however, I donned metaphoric earplugs against the cacophony and delighted in the touch of his hand on my thigh, the interlacing of our fingers underneath the table. I deserve pleasure, damn it, I told myself. And if the universe brought me a young narcissistic stud with a Peter Pan complex, well, I didn't want a real relationship anyway. I was going to give thanks and indulge. Becca was basking in the afterglow of her second helping of a dessert at the vegan's house when she realized perhaps she should have asked about the ingredients first. Her little spring roll had been single, not just single, celibate, for the better part of a decade. She was his first visit to the buffet since his college girlfriend. Understandably, she panicked. I knew I should have talked to him about it first, she admitted when she narrated the story to me the following morning. But I knew he wouldn't want to have sex with me if I told him I wasn't looking for a relationship, and I just really needed to get laid. Yep, that's the thing about the buffet. Sometimes we help ourselves to stuff we would never normally indulge in because it's there, and it looks so damn good. And sometimes, after we polish off that first serving of chocolate mousse, we go back for more, because who the hell knows when we'll ever get back to this particular restaurant? I didn't tell Becca about my experience with the artist years before. Mostly because it just didn't come to mind, but when I thought about it later, I realized that my lack of interest in a relationship with him had actually had an almost aphrodisiacal effect. So I'm not sure it would have mattered if she'd talked to the vegan first. Also, it's utterly irrelevant. She didn't have the conversation, but neither did he. Ultimately, she had wanted to enjoy what she perceived to be a gift from the universe, a fun little fling to satiate her dessert craving. Text messages from the vegan began rolling in the next morning and continued for several days. Becca vacillated wildly between wondering if this was the guy she'd been hoping for, and perhaps she was just being overcritical out of fear or self-protection, or if her low-level interest was an authentic response from her intuition or soul self or whatever, that this guy was definitely not the guy. A couple days later, when she found herself much more attracted to a different fellow, the answer was clear. She tried to let him down gently, pointing to the reality that she hadn't really been looking for a relationship to begin with. The vegan, however, did not take it well. He'd already started to think about kids, a family, with her, he told her. They should just get to know each other better. Long message after long message, day after day, he pleaded with her, which, of course, served only to further disenchant her. In my case, with the artist, it had been slightly more serious than disenchantment. Just a few days after I had overindulged myself at the buffet with him, I left for an extended vacation to South America. About 2 hours into the journey, I got a message from him, wondering if I still needed skin grafts and if he could donate some skin to me. Wouldn't it be cool, I read, if we were connected like that? No, I assured him. I do not need more skin grafts, but thanks for the offer. When I got back from my trip, there were a bag of letters, 10 to be exact, professing his profound love and suggesting the most beautiful culmination of our story would be to give organized society the middle finger and, quote, go crazy together. Disenchanted doesn't even begin to describe it. Becca ached with compassion, pushing toward guilt for the way the vegan responded. She felt terrible for not discussing what each person was looking for before they'd had sex, because some part of her had known she should, and she didn't, because she wanted to get laid. And while she knew she wasn't responsible for taking care of the feelings of a grown man she'd only known for a few weeks, it still bothered her that he was so hurt, and so clearly couldn't let her, go. The thing is, it sucks to hurt someone like that. It sucks to feel like you're responsible for the emotional pain of another human. At least it does for most people, for people like Becca and me. For men, it seems, it isn't quite such a devastating scenario. I mean, I'm obviously not a man, but it seems that, in general, men see a woman they want to sleep with, do exactly that, and then are affronted by the emotional attachment of a partner they saw as temporary. At least that's what pop culture tells us. And while I realize that TV and movies are not reliable evidence of real life, I've also heard plenty of real life stories that go exactly like that. And I'm not trying to blame men here. Whether or not they have an emotional response to that kind of situation is not really my point, or my concern. My problem lies with the reality that Becca and I both took steps to avoid heartbreak by attempting to show respect and speak honestly with our decadent delights in lieu of just flat out ghosting them. I even went so far as to lay out my emotional cards before we ever touched each other. So what the fuck, universe? Are we being punished for delighting in pleasure for pleasure's sake? Men did and do it all the time. Again, not trying to generalize based on gender here, just for clarity of the message. Perhaps then it isn't punishment from the universe exactly, but an opportunity to learn that we don't have to take responsibility for another person's emotions, specifically humans with whom we've shared a bed. Maybe we could make it easier on ourselves if we just all accepted that until otherwise stated, any trips to the buffet are emotionally significant only as long as we're in the restaurant. Or perhaps we could just organize ourselves according to the restaurant. People that are, quote, just visiting the buffet on one block and those that are auditioning for a full-time live-in chef on the other. In that light, there's a very supportive case to be made for dating apps, which is how I met the paralegal. After chatting occasionally for a week or so, he finally pulled the trigger and came over one night. We talked and flirted and played the awkward, are you trying to hold my hand or just reaching for the chips routine. We indulged in letting a hand linger just a little too long on a thigh. We kissed until my lips were so swollen I woke up in the night and had to put chapstick on. It was lovely. I thanked the universe as I fell asleep, alone, that night, for the wonderful gift of being human, of being able to feel all those magnificent things with another human. And I gave myself a little pat on the back. I had let a beautiful younger man savor much of the decadence that is a woman without feeling old or ugly or generally insecure, indicative of some serious progress in my personal growth. And I was flattered when I got several messages from him later that night, reiterating what a wonderful time he'd had. But the yellow flag went up when I had more messages right away the next morning, asking when we could see each other again. Okay, perhaps it was time to have the talk. I wasn't sure how to bring it up exactly, keen, of course, not to repeat the word vomit situation I'd had with the artist almost a decade before. We were only about a half hour into our second date when the paralegal solved the problem for me, and the giant red flags started snapping up like those fan-inflated Gumby-style dancers outside a car wash. So how long is your visa in Colombia? Do you think you might want a relationship? Do you think you could ever fall in love again? Damn it, universe! What are you trying to tell me here? Is it really impossible to have great chemistry with someone with whom you don't want a real relationship? Is it impossible to enjoy the pleasures of living in a human body without hurting anyone? I'd thought all along that the lessons I'd been offered in both of these iterations of my singlehood were about receiving pleasure, or more accurately, believing I deserve it and letting myself enjoy it even if I'm not perfect. And I think those elements are still in play, though I can also acknowledge that I've come a long way. But it still feels a little like the universe is giving me opportunities at pleasure only to have them turn sour immediately afterward. It's like the buffet is being laid out for me, but only with food that's a little too close to its expiration date and might make me sick. I never did fully indulge with the paralegal, and I'm quite sure I could message him right now and I'd have a lovely meal laid out for me tonight. It doesn't feel right, though. Whether because I'm genuinely afraid of breaking his heart in some way or because he clearly feels more than I do, I don't know. Perhaps it's neither of those things. Maybe it's an amalgamation of the last iteration of this lesson with the artist and this one. Perhaps the reality is that I learned with the artist that yes, I do deserve pleasure, and yes, I am worthy of it, but that it's important to know and hold out for exactly what we want. We need to know exactly what brings us pleasure and what kind of pleasure we're seeking. In retrospect, I can see that if the artist had also been the perfect chemistry friend, my perfect dish at the buffet, he, may have distracted me from focusing on what brings me pleasure in my life, in myself. I can see how the most decadent meal I can imagine would make it difficult to remember how much I enjoy salad, the parts of myself and my life in which I enjoy investing my time and attention. Personally, I believe profoundly in the idea that we are energy beings and that we can adjust that energy to attract to us, to, quote, manifest, exactly what we want and need in our lives. The thing is, we have very little experience managing our energy. We're not taught much about how exactly to do that. Not to mention the reality that a huge portion of the people and things and experiences that affect our energy are unknowable to us. We can't see our energetic bodies very well, so we're not ever really sure what other energies are impacting us. And that's true even if we're looking for and working to heal those influences. Many of us are too afraid or unaware to even consider pulling back the curtain on our inner bodies, spirits, and lives. All that to say that walking out of my house in a dress that enhances my ability to radiate my sexuality with the intention of indulging at the buffet might be casting a net that's just a bit too wide. Perhaps these little tastes of what I think I want are just that, little tastes, to keep me from filling up on the bites and missing the main course altogether, and to help me be as clear as possible about exactly what kind of meal I'm looking for. I think for Becca, her excitement about sex with the vegan was more about being wanted. So even though it looked like he brought her pleasure, the validation that she is desirable, she is deserving, she is capable of attracting a delicious meal is what was actually feeding her. I think that's in part what the artist was for me, a much needed reminder after a difficult breakup that I could enjoy the buffet. Maybe, in our respective contexts, these guys are just the first course. The bread slices and butter pats that can be satisfying if we're starving, but if we indulge too much, ruin the main course. They taste good and smell incredible, but really only serve to whet our appetites. Perhaps it's less of a lesson from the universe then, and more a reminder that we can have what we want if we're selective and don't get carried away with the appetizers. That it's possible that deeper feelings will come up for one party or the other, but that all we can do is take responsibility for our own, be as open and honest as possible, and leave it there. That finding pleasure in ourselves and our own lives is the key to refining our energies to draw an ever more perfect iteration of what we really want. The thing I realized with the paralegal is that there are other dishes on the table, and I get to pick the ones I want. I don't have to just accept what's on offer because that's what's in front of me. If I can conjure some patience and walk down to the end of the buffet, I might just find my favorite dish waiting for me. As my very wise dear friend mentioned, it would be kind of sad to step into this new iteration of myself, shining with confidence and wide open to receive pleasure, and then have the first guy that came into my life also be the chemistry friend guy. Perhaps it isn't quite the right fit because there are lots more tastings to come, and I get to view myself as worthy of trying as many of them as I like. Because I can see all around me that God or higher self or the universe or whatever is laying out for me the very finest spread. I deserve the very best. We all do, though my version of the most decadent possible meal is going to look completely different to yours, and that's what makes it so wonderful. If we can just connect to ourselves and hold out for what we really want. I hope you have a decadent, pleasure-filled week. Join me next week for more stories on the way loving our lives elevates our souls. If you liked this podcast, please remember to subscribe and consider supporting us on Patreon. There you'll get the real world, right now stories about the adventures of living as a weird, wonderful single woman in a third world country. Learn more at patreon.com/Jacqueline Lene. And if you'd like to create more pleasure and self-love in your own life, check out the workshops and personal support programs offered on my website at www.authorjacquelinelanae.com. That's JACLYNLANAE. Thanks for listening.